Welcome to this week's episode. When I first met Max Trescott, I thought his name was Max West because that's how he was introduced on the Airplane Geeks podcast. And I had no idea that he was the same as Max Trescott, who's the person who wrote all of the books on the G1000 and a lot of the other training materials that I was using as a student pilot. So anyway, I was kind of embarrassed when I first figured that out. But now we get to do a podcast with the one and only Max Trescott. Max is the 2008 National CFI of the Year. He was selected to represent all 96,000 flight instructors in the U.S. He's written 2 books, including Max Trescott G1000 and Perspective Glass Cockpit Handbook. He also has online courses for the G1000 at pilotlearning.com. He lives in the San Francisco Bay Area and is a Cirrus Platinum CSIP instructor. He teaches full-time in the Cirrus aircraft, and he's also type-rated in the Cirrus SF-50 Vision Jets, the really cool ones, right? He's been a co-host for the last 6 years on the Airplane Geeks podcast, and for the past 3 years, he's hosted his own podcast that's focused strictly on general aviation called Aviation News Talk Podcast. And now we get to talk with the one and only Max Trescott. It was the coolest group of people on the audio circuit, I would have to say, in the aviation industry. And I learned a whole lot from listening to the Airplane Geeks when I was new to the industry. And Max Trescott, of course, is one of the people that I listen to on a regular basis on the Airplane Geeks and other places. So it's really cool to be talking to you finally. I know we've been meaning to do this forever, Max.
Well, we certainly have a good excuse to do it because things are different in the industry right now.
Absolutely. That is for sure. And so if there was ever a good reason to get your input on something, this is certainly it. It's the biggest change I've seen in the 15 years I've been hanging around the industry. And I know you've probably been around for a while as well. So
certainly it's unprecedented. We had a major downturn in 2001, but it wasn't anything like this. This is just totally different.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I was just kind of getting into the industry in 2001. We bought our Skyhawk in 2000, and we bought 2 over the years. And that first one was right during that recession. And, our plan was to buy, kind of like people flip apartments, was to buy a Skyhawk and lease it back to a flight school, and we were going to make a ton of money, and it was going to be great, and we were going to have these fabulous airplanes to fly, and it was such a fabulous idea. And the economy convinced us otherwise pretty quickly.
Yep, the best laid plans.
Right. So, Max, what have you observed about this epidemic and its impact on the industry?
Well, let me talk about the flight training industry specifically. I think people are probably familiar with what's happened with air traffic, air carriers, and things like that. With flight instruction, at least from what I have seen here in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a heavily populated area, which has been hit, reasonably hard by COVID-19. All the flight schools that I know of have been shut down. And they are just now starting to reopen. The flight school that I teach at has said that they will start allowing dual flight instruction this week. I'm not teaching this week. I'm still waiting to kind of figure out exactly what kinds of protocols I want to put in place before I jump into the airplane again. But we've gone through kind of initially what was a hard shutdown where there was no flying allowed whatsoever. And by the way, this is a club with around 900 members, 50 airplanes, and on the order of 40 flight instructors. And so you can imagine there's just a lot of going and coming, a lot of people. It's a complex operation with a lot of moving parts. And so given that we had some of the first cases in California right here in this county, I think they did the right thing, which was to immediately shut down and then kind of figure out how to get started back up again in a well thought out process. And what they did initially was to allow solo flights, and then they actually said that those would be just 1 per plane per day. They didn't want more than 1 person flying the same airplane the same day, which gave them time for cleaning airplanes between flights. Then they moved to, yes, you can bring along family members to you. And now they've moved to, yes, you can bring along flight instructors, at least for those flight instructors who are willing to do that. And not all flight instructors have said they're ready to immediately jump back in the airplane.
Right. Well, and if you if you're at some point in your flight instruction, you can't get very far without an instructor. So that's
Well, and you also really can't socially distance very well in a GA
no,
aircraft.
that's for sure. Like I'm thinking a Skyhawk, there's maybe 3 feet between one person's nose and the next person's nose if they're both looking straight forward,
Hmm.
if that. So I think that's what German standards now is the 1 meter or whatever. So since they've been opening up and getting a little bit closer together in some of their cities, so
Sure.
that's
Now, I did consider doing flight training only in caravans. I would sit in the 10th seat in the back of the plane, talk to the pilot up front.
that's
but,
expensive.
but I only have one client that flies caravans, so that
There
probably
you
wouldn't have
go.
worked.
Right, they spend a little bit more on fuel costs and rental than they would in the
Indeed.
typical trainers, right?
Not practical.
Exactly. So, what changes are you expecting in the next 90 days or 1 year?
I think in the next 90 days, we're going to see a slow ramp back up. And I think it's going to be probably first with people who were getting close to check rides. I think they are the ones who are most anxious to get back into the sky because they were within weeks or a month or two of getting a check ride. And they're the ones that I've been hearing the most from in terms of,
Yeah.
hey, Max, when are you going to start flying again? I want to get back to doing this. And some of them have already scheduled check rides, and most of them have already pushed out check rides one or more times. So those are the people I think who are most anxious to get back in, and those are the people that we'll probably see show up first over the next few weeks. I would imagine that the typical influx that we see usually around this time of year of people interested in learning to fly is probably going to be much, much slower than usual. I've observed in the past that spring is always the time when I have lots and lots of leads of people who want to learn to fly. And I think we'll probably end up missing that cycle this year around. Maybe we'll catch some of those people in the fall, but I would say we're probably not going to see too many new people showing up at the flight school going, hey, I'm really interested in learning to fly right now.
Right. Well, that's for sure. That was a challenge even for me when I was learning to fly, is that muscle memory. If you take a break while you are in flight training, you end up with a big setback. And so I know the flight schools may earn a few more hours from that, but it doesn't really work in anybody's interest to have those big gaps in training.
No, and there are lots of other changes. For example, there's a pretty long list that our flight school put out a week or so ago when they said they would resume dual training. And they do now permit multiple flights in the same aircraft. They do require everyone in the airplane to be wearing masks. They have eliminated all of the reasons to come into the building. So, for example, the computers that people might use for checking the weather or flight planning have been moved out of sight or no longer accessible.
Mm.
They've limited, I think, to a maximum of 4 people in the building at any time, maximum of 2 in any flight simulator room, which means if you have 2 simulators going, hey, the building is now maxed out. All of the keys are available in a box on the outside, and the front desk personnel are at the office but are not in public view. They're working behind the scenes. So there really isn't a reason to go into the flight school. So I think they've done a good job there. I know that some flight schools have put in kind of one-way, entrance and egress from the flight school so that people are not passing each other, as they're going in and out of the same entrance. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And that's, I guess that's most of it. Certainly there's more regular cleaning of the aircraft going on. Oh, and the mask rule is for the entire lesson. It's not just for the time that you're in the airplane. It's from
Oh,
the
wow.
beginning of contact to the end of contact. I expect that I'll probably be doing more electronic logbook entries. I'm not as anxious to scribble in people's logbooks at this point in time. And just this morning, I went ahead and ordered off of Amazon a non-contact thermometer, and I just told the first person I'm going to be meeting with, and I plan to take everybody's temperature, yours and mine, at the very beginning of a lesson. And I know that that's not a guarantee that it will
Mm.
catch someone who has COVID-19, but at least it would screen out some small percentage of people who have a fever. So those are some of the kinds of things that I'll be doing. Of course, I've also bought a number of masks to use as well.
Oh, very smart. And you're telling people ahead of time so they're not surprised when you're pointing a gun at them when they show up.
Exactly. I found years ago when I was working in sales, people hate surprises. So
Right?
I try
Very
not to
smart.
surprise my customers either.
Right. Okay. And of course, this is a sales and marketing podcast. So I know a lot of flight instructors are uh, in the business of getting their own leads and their own generating their own students. A lot of schools are in the process of trying to figure out how to turn the spigot back on after all of this. And you've worked in sales, so you have that background. So you're probably in a really good position to give advice. What would you suggest that first maybe flight instructors and then second maybe the schools can do to get those spigots turned back on?
Sure. I spent 25 years at Hewlett Packard, the first 16 or so in marketing, and the last 8 in sales, selling $500,000 computers. So it was kind of an interesting training ground to learn a lot of things. That being said, I'm having so much more fun teaching flying that I'm
I can imagine.
happy to have made that transition. Well, one of the things I remember, and I think I remember this from business school, is that studies have shown in the past that during a downturn, the companies that invest in marketing during downturns always seem to be the ones that come out stronger than their competitors when the market recovers. So I think this is not really the time for people to pull back on marketing and advertising, even though from a budget standpoint, they may feel, oh, we really need to do this. I would say no matter what business you're in, if there's any way you can figure out how to keep your marketing going, or to figure out how to make it even more targeted and more effective, you really should do that. For example, I know that there are fewer people advertising on Facebook and Google right now. And so I think that means your message really has a better chance of reaching your target customer, and possibly at a lower cost as well. I've been using Facebook ads to advertise the podcast that I do, the Aviation News Talk podcast, and I've been seeing good results. And I've continued that during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it's also a good time to just kind of look at pricing structures. Are there discounts or incentives that you can offer to people, for folks that employ people? And by the way, I've kind of, after I left HP, wanted to have my own business where I didn't have employees. And that's nice, because at a time like now, I don't have to worry about laying them off or furloughing them. But for those who do have employees, I would say this is a time to really look for creative ways to either try to get them to work at home, or maybe to shift them into other kinds of work at your business so you can keep them productive. For example, you might want to try and get them on the phone calling prospective customers. If I were a charter business right now, I expect that my normal business customers are probably going to be down, but there might be some other segments I could go after that might be up. For example, I might look at medium to high net wealth people, maybe people that used to always fly first class, but now really aren't that keen to get on an airliner. Those would be the kinds of people I think I would be calling if I were doing any type of charter or airline type kinds of stuff. I'd be looking to figure out how to shift more into cargo, because clearly passenger services has gone down, but cargo is up significantly. So I think it's a time where no matter what business you're in, it really makes sense to just rethink all of your assumptions, or look at all of your different market opportunities. Figure out how can you shift your business in a way to mitigate the downturn in some customer segments, and to find other customer segments where you can look to pick up new business.
Right. That is fantastic. And I know there's a great quote from one of our clients, Gene Clow. He's a broker. There is no such thing as a bad economy, because something that is bad for one customer type is fantastic for another. So if you can be creative and find those opportunities, that's some fantastic ideas.
Yeah, and I think another thing we all have to look at, and you and I right now are talking over Zoom. The whole
Hmm.
world has become Zoom, knowledgeable. I've been doing lots of that because that's the way we've recorded a lot of our podcasts in the past. But I think everyone needs to really think about what are ways that I can use, Zoom or the new Facebook rooms or any of those kinds of ways to connect with either clients or to put on webinars. I think this is a great time to be prospecting for new customers that might not be ready to buy right now. But if you can just hook them by giving them free webinars or things like that that tell them about your business, at least you've got them move partially down the funnel, so that by the time when things recover a little bit and they're ready to buy, they're going to be more interested in closing a deal with you in particular. So I think we all have to kind of look at our online meetings, figure out, hey, do you look good? Do you have good lighting, for example? I think it's real common for people just to figure, hey, Zoom, that's as simple as opening my laptop and just starting to talk. And the answer is no, it's not. you you want to take a look at your background. You want to see what people are going to see. And so, for example, if you've got a new Zoom account, I would say just turn it on, have a meeting with yourself, adjust the camera, look at the background, see what people are going to see, and figure out how to adjust that. If you're using a laptop, boy, I would really suggest you get a dedicated camera instead. We all know who are using laptops these days because we're getting better views up people's noses.
Exactly. Or holding their phone like this, so
Yeah.
that you see this angle of people's face, which is never a good look, right?
Exactly. So there are so many things you can do to look so much better on Zoom if you just give it a little forethought. And I
Mhm.
think that's important. I think people like doing business with people who they perceive who care about the details, who are
Mhm.
neat in their appearance. If you look sloppy, they're going to think, well, maybe you're sloppy in other aspects of your business. So
Right.
all these are important things. So I would say, yes, get into doing more Zoom and webinars and things like that, but do some practice first with your family and your friends. Or maybe if you're going to be doing live streaming, there are live streaming consultants who can help you get the right equipment. For example, the little C290, pardon me, C920 webcam is probably used a heck of a lot. On the other hand, if you've got a better camera with a wider aperture lens, you're going to have more blurred backgrounds. It's going to probably look a little bit better. You're going to have higher quality. So just put the same kind of thought and attention to doing your online meetings and Zoom calls that you would give to pre-flighting your aircraft and making sure that they're ready to fly.
Right. I don't know if you heard the NBAA NewsHour this morning, where they were talking about using video to connect with customers during the downturn. And a big issue that a lot of people have is fear of the camera. And I
Mm.
think a lot of people are being forced, because of COVID-19, to get over that, or to find ways to deal with that, or to get through that fear. And I think it's just like a fear of flying. The best way to get through it is to get moving, and have a meeting with your spouse, or have a meeting with your dog in the other room. I mean, whatever you need to do to get comfortable with this mode of communication, because it's huge and it's much more powerful than text or anything else. And here's your opportunity to do something that maybe your competitors aren't doing or afraid to do.
I think people are often self-conscious about how they're perceived by others, and I think over time people will generally will come to learn that no, the rest of the world is really not that caught up with you and what you look like and what you're thinking and how you're acting. People have
Hmm.
their own sets of concerns. They're not nearly as concerned about you as you may be concerned about you. So I would say, yeah, just kind of get over the fear and the shyness, because it's you're overinflating the concerns and the issues. Nothing bad is going to happen. Yeah, you might end up making a tiny gaffe here or there, but we all do that, and you learn to laugh at it. It's part of what makes us human. So yes, the more you practice, the easier it is. I suspect it's probably easier for younger people who've been using FaceTime and things like that for 10 years now. They're so comfortable with picking up the phone and seeing people on the other end. I'm guessing folks who perhaps haven't been using computer technology as much, or who are older, maybe just a little bit more sensitive and concerned and self-conscious. but I would say it's no different than standing up in front of a crowd and giving a presentation. You don't just run out in front of the crowd the first time. You practice, 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 and then you go stand out in front of the crowd. So I think it's the same kind of thing applies here.
Absolutely. And nobody cares, if you've got in fact, it's kind of a nice way to connect with people. We've all got quarantine haircuts right now. We were just talking about that at the beginning of this call. So, uh, perfection is sometimes the enemy of authenticity. So, yeah, you want to practice. And I totally agree with that. The more polished you can be, the more comfortable you're going to be. But don't throw a video out just because you feel like, well, people are going to be looking at the fact that my eyebrows aren't perfectly level the whole time, or you're going to be noticing things that nobody else cares about.
And I think a key thing is that people are always looking for quality. When
Yeah.
the beginning of the pandemic started, one of the early thoughts I had for my aviation news talk podcast was maybe I should be greatly increasing the frequency of this. Maybe as people are sitting at home, I should be, instead of putting the show out about once a week, doing it a couple of times a week or daily, or things like that. And the more I thought about it, I realized no, people are looking for quality. And so don't just feel like volume is going to be the way to go. Oh, I'm going to crank out 50 videos and that's going to help grow my business. No, actually, one or two pretty darn good videos that address your customers' pain points, the things that they're worried about right now, those are going to be one heck of a lot more effective. So I would say continue to try and strategically target a few elements of your marketing mix that are most important for you and just do those exceptionally well.
Right, exactly. That's one thing I take issue about the news hour this morning. They were saying you have to post daily. And for my market, and possibly for yours too, I'm thinking it's better to do a quality production once a week than to do a daily post on what you had for breakfast, as an example. So, you have to plan these out so that they're valuable for people and not wasting their time as well.
Totally. Yeah, you don't want to waste people's time. You want to give them quality. I could see that daily makes a whole lot of sense for Instagram influencers, but these are
Mm,
people who are making their career by showing off, all kinds of clothing and running shoes and things like that. This is not the business that we're in.
no, we have day jobs.
People are not interested in what I will call superficial, looks and so on. So, no, yeah, if you're looking to get the greatest number of followers, you're not going to be in the aviation business. You're going to be showing young models, showing off clothes and at great travel locations and things like that. Yes, that's the post 10 times a day model. That doesn't apply for us here in aviation. I agree. Once a week is totally adequate. And we commented earlier, just before we started talking, I'm seeing a slight downturn in our numbers for podcasting, and I know that's true across the industry right now.
Yeah.
People don't, just because people are sitting at home, they don't have more time to listen to a podcast. Now, you commented that the YouTube watching is up somewhat. So don't just concentrate on volume, concentrate on quality and putting it out in the channels that work best for you.
Right, absolutely. So, just to kind of wrap this up, I know you're involved in a number of things, including a number of podcasts, and you do flight training, and you have a number of different enterprises that you're running. But if you could maybe let our listeners know some of the things that you're up to and how they can connect with those and get involved, I think that would be really helpful.
Oh, sure. Most of what I do, they can find out at aviationnewstalk.com. It's a weekly show that's focused on general aviation. So we don't talk about the airlines or military, things like that. It's all strictly about general aviation. And then I also publish books, probably best known for my Garmin G1000 Glass Cockpit Handbook. I have another one which will be coming out for a Garmin product probably within a month or so. So that's how I used my pandemic time, was to accelerate this project that was taking way too long. And I would suggest that people do the same. If you had some downtime, hopefully you've been using it to work on those projects that you haven't been able to get to. And people can find the G1000 book at g1000book.com.
Excellent. It is a fantastic book. I read it. We had a G1000 in our Skyhawk, and that was my Bible. So it was really, really helpful. Of course, I learned on a G1000. I never learned the steam gauges to begin with, so I'm one of those kind of pilots that a lot of people complain about. But I did learn the steam gauges. I did have one instructor who insisted that we cover the G1000. So all of the flight training I did with him was definitely old school.
Well, the nice thing that I've learned is that when people learn to fly in a G1000, they're also at the same time learning how to fly in round gauge instruments, because we've got 3 round gauge instruments in that airplane. The reverse is not true. If you're learning in a 6 gauge aircraft, you're not learning how to do the G1000. So it's actually, I think, more efficient to learn in the G1000. You've got more tools, and you're going to learn how to fly a 6-pack anyway.
Right, exactly. And learning how to flying in the future. So that's a wonderful thing. Well, thank you for spending some time with us, and that's actually kind of reassuring. I feel better having talked with you, from one of the hotspots in the world about the COVID situation, and you're surviving and you're finding ways to adapt and making it all work.
Yes, it's like everything else. We just have to constantly re-examine all our assumptions and move forward. So yes, life continues here in the heart of COVID country.
Absolutely.